individuals here from Public Works to other departments. What I would ask is if we could start off with Chief Shields, and from there, everyone else identify yourself for the record and what department you're with.
Hi, Erika Shields, Chief of Police, LMPD.
Vincent James, Chief of Community Building.
Tamika Laird, Office of Resilience and Community Services.
Keith Hackett, Assistant Director, Public Works, Solid Waste Management Services Division.
All right, do we have anyone else present?
Josh Judah, Assistant Chief of Police.
All right, Mr. Officer, Assistant Chief Judah. Anyone else? Okay. I'll start off just by teeing us up. We're all aware why we're here. A number of us are upset about what took place with the homeless camp removal. We're upset with the lack of notice, the throwing away people's items, and we're here to sort of publicly discuss and get on the record and let the community hear exactly what happened, who's responsible, who made the call, who was involved potentially in the decision making, and what we're going to do potentially to make sure that something like this never happens again. With that being said, Chief Shields, if you could give us a little background of what took place.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me and allowing me to walk through what occurred. We had our homeless outreach officers engaging in this particular area in question, and they had seen that it was getting dirtier and dirtier. There was a fair amount of human excrement there, and so it was scheduled to be cleaned. They were coordinating this clean with Public Works via email, and they did not directly engage the Office of Resiliency and Community Services. They were CC'd on the email, but they weren't. The email was never directly to them, and so there was this planned event to go out there and clean the area up. The day that it was to occur got canceled because of the inclement weather. When the officers were back at work, they arranged again with Public Works to go out there and clean the area. At the time of the actual cleaning, the one officer who had been in the loop on it all had to leave for an emergency, and so it was verbally communicated to another officer, this is what's supposed to occur. The officer took it to mean that it was a clear as opposed to a clean, went out there and met with Public Works, and the property was cleared out as opposed to cleaned up. I understand that folks may think that there's something more nefarious here, but what I have identified as the root cause is LMPD does not have a policy governing its officers and how they manage and support, most significantly, the homeless population and the homeless communities. And the reality of it is the department has to be better aligned with Chief James' department, his office, the Office of Resilience and Community Services, and OCEAN. And it didn't occur, but there also was no structure. There's no structure in how this has occurred. It's just been done at a very organic level. And however well-intentioned, it also shows the problems that come with just randomly seeing things through. So to that end, it's why I continue to express that I am sorry. LMPD is responsible for this to the extent that we need to operate in truly a support role and not be the decision makers on when a property is due to be cleaned or cleared. And part of the development of the policy will be explicit in ensuring that whomever they're meeting out there, either from Office of Resiliency or from Public Works, has paperwork showing what is to occur and that it has been authorized through those departments who are tasked with overseeing the sustainment of these encampments.
Mr. Chair, you're muted.
Apologize for that. Before we get into the questions from the committee members who are going to get in the queue here, I've got my queue here in front of me. I'm going to ask some general questions of all of you all who are here today from Public Works and LMPD. And that is going to be this, is I'll start off, and whoever's got the answer, feel free to jump in. But was a 21-day notice given, and did 21 days expire before the actions were taken?
Well, what I can speak from the LMPD side is when in talking to the employees who actually work in this terrain, when they go out with Public Works, they are under the assumption that it's occurred. And so I'm not saying that that's right or wrong, but I'm saying that has not been a part of the process for LMPD to secure the 21-day notice. And I did, in reviewing Oregon ordinance, see that it is the responsibility of Public Works, which is why our employees must ensure that the appropriate party has authorized it. So I realize that's a deviation on your question, is was it ever done? I don't know, but I can just say moving forward, this is a space that our employees are going to have to check that box.
Well, someone's got to know if a 21-day notice is posted. And there's got to be a record somewhere of when that was posted. And we know the date that the cleanup and clear out took place. Can anyone tell me, did 21 days lapse from when the notice was put up to when the action was taken? Anyone?
So Councilmember Ackerson, this is Tamika Laird with the Office of Resilience and Community Services. I'm the director. We did not issue a 21-day notice. So your answer to your question is no and no.
Okay, so no 21-day notice was issued.
That's correct.
Okay, that's important. Should a 21-day notice have been issued?
If there is a clearing, there should have been a 21-day notice issued. You're correct.
Okay, so there's mistake number one that we've identified. Let me get a little understanding of this. You know, who does the actual clearing?
No.
President Ackerson, I think what will be helpful if we have an understanding in terms of how the process should work, because we've been working this process for several years that was implemented 3 years ago in terms of how we would go about cleaning and when we would also when it would be designated as a clearing. So I'll let Tamika Laird, the director of RCS, just outline for us at a high level the process in which it would take place. I think understanding that would give you an indication in terms of how it needed to take place and how it's taking place going forward.
Well, that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out is, who calls the shot that says we're going to go do this? Is it everybody, or is there somebody at the top that is in charge of that makes the final say? And then the question is if it's LMPD's officer making the call, but then Public Works folks doing the work, who's answering to who? I mean, we need to figure this out. So if you could explain to me how the process should work, and then let's talk about how the process failed.
All right, I can respond to that. So how it works is I'm going to go by bullet point by bullet point, and I'm just going to do high level here, okay? If you need me to get into the weeds, just let me know which bullet point you would like for me to give you specifics and details on. So we received the complaint. So the complaint comes from 311. So once we receive the complaint, my RCS homeless encampment coordinator coordinates the actual assessment within 48 hours. So we set up the schedule with Public Works, Codes and Regs, and then also LMPD. Sometimes Public Health and Wellness, if it's a level 3. And I can talk about the levels later. So initially what happens is that once we receive the complaint, then the homeless encampment coordinator actually goes through and coordinates the actual appointment schedule to have the assessment done of the complaint. Then they actually schedule it, they go out to the site, and actually review it, assess it and evaluate the actual location, the homeless encampment location. Once they assess the location, they make a joint decision at the site is whether it needs to be a level 1, level 2, or level 3. Level 1 means minor, meaning that there's no encampment, that it's only debris and trash. Because we get a lot of 311 calls that says there's encampments, but they're really not. It's just where there's a lot of piled up trash at the location. So we go through and validate to make sure if it is an actual encampment. If not, the level 1 is issued and Public Works comes in and does the cleaning of the location. If it's a level 2, that means moderate. That means we have to issue a 21-day notice. The 21-day notice is then actually initiated, but before that, we do 3 days notice to the coalition, 3 days prior notice to the coalition and the outreach groups to notify them to let them know that the 21-day notice will be posted. And then from there, once it's posted, then we have our outreach groups. They go in and work for 3 weeks. They work on relocation and then also services, supportive services. The next step is the actual level 3, which is considered to be severe. Severe means that we have to have public health and wellness involved. They have to come out and do an assessment and determination if the site is considered to be a hazard or a public health emergency. And once that determination is made, then what will happen is that we have to do immediate clearing. So that means that we then work right back to level 2. We would actually work, instead of doing a 21-day posting, we would actually notify outreach and go through those steps very quickly. And if we cannot be able to relocate and relocate them in that time period, allowed to actually move them swiftly off the property, off the location, then we will actually find somewhere to store their paraphernalia until they can be able to access it or get it in the future. And it's within 30 days because that's what the ordinance says. So then from there, once the 21-day posting has happened, we work it for 3 weeks. And then on the 21st day, not public health and wellness, but Public Works comes in, and also LMPD. The LMPD is there for safety and support to be able to clear the remaining debris that's left. And then from there, we put up a no camping signs at the location to ensure that for future.
Okay, so just so we're clear for the record, this was a level 2, was it not?
This was a level 2. Well, I don't know if it was a level 2. We weren't involved in the assessment. So I don't know if it was a level 2 or not.
Mr. Hackett, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, based on the information that was given to me by our advisor, our administrator and supervisor, it could have been level 2 just because people's stuff is there. Just like Tamika said, if people are there, it could be a level 2 because people are there and their stuff is there. A cleaning is just us coming in there and just picking up litter. Now we have cleaned around folks' tents because we just want to at least try to keep it halfway manageable, and that's what after talking to our staff, the initial intent was just to clean the area and not necessarily clear it, because we know that the 21-day notice has to be done. And because people were there, that falls into that place of level 2, 21-day notice, based on talking to our supervisor and also our administrator during this situation.
So we know that it's not a level 3, though. It's not a immediate, as I've heard, hazard or public health emergency, right? It was not declared a level 3.
Correct. Based on the information I received and talking to our staff, correct.
We know because people are there, it becomes a level 2. So I would say that, just for the record here, which should be certain, it's a level 2, right?
Again, when we got there, level 2 means that stuff there and our people, and even if people are not there, having stuff there, people can come back eventually. So that's how we would treat it, just because it's a lot of stuff there. When I say stuff, I mean possessions or, tents and things of that nature.
Can anyone tell me, was there a complaint called in? Because I heard a complaint called into 311. Was there a complaint called in on this matter?
We checked go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Based on my understanding, there have been multiple complaints because there were businesses opening up there. There had been some harassment of a female employee. So my understanding was that there had been multiple complaints brought forward. Yes.
Can anyone produce any documentation regarding complaints? A call to 311 or anything else?
I know that they flagged down police. Whether or not it's in 311 or not, I don't know.
Anyone else? Nope. So so at this point, we don't have anything to document any complaints. Now, when a complaint comes in, is there a point department? The idea being, we've heard codes and regs, we've heard LMPD, and we've heard Public Works. Is there a point department designated that would be in charge of this situation?
We are, the Office of Resilience and Community Services is actually responsible for all the complaints that come in. So they come to, how that works is that they're reported in 311, and then they're routed to the Office of Resilience and Community Services Agency. And the RCS Homeless Encampment Coordinator works on coordinating the effort to be able to respond to the complaint.
Can you tell me, did RCS, do they have any documentation of any complaints?
We do not. We actually checked our record. We checked our database. I had my homeless encampment coordinator check and verify to see if we received a complaint at Hancock and Market, and we did not.
Okay. Now, in theory, if a complaint had been received, who would be in charge of verifying that it was a level 1, a level 2, or level 3, and ensuring that, in this case being a level 2, that the 21-day notice was complied with? Who would be responsible for that?
It will be an actual where the homeless encampment coordinator will actually set up the schedule for all the actual agencies involved to meet at the location to assess the actual location for a level 1, level 2, or level 3. At that time, once the decision is made by those agencies that are at the site doing the assessment, then that will determine if it's a 21-day posting. If it is a 21-day posting, then we will actually notify the Coalition for the Homeless, outreach for them to actually give them ahead of time. We give them an actual communication ahead of time that a 21-day posting will be in effect for that location.
So,
and then, go ahead.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get here is, I'm speculating, but that particular officer called the shots to make this happen this day. Am I incorrect about that speculation?
That would be up to LMPD to answer.
I'm sorry,
Does the name Sergeant Christian Beaver mean anything?
So, what I will say is all of the officers there were well-intentioned, and I'm not going to sit here. These are officers and sergeants, okay? This is the rank and file. And at the end of the day, they did what they believed they needed to do and were supposed to be doing. And it's incumbent on the department to have a policy that provides them with correct and active guidelines. So I understand the frustration that's here, but I also will say we've got to afford them the guidelines within to operate. And that had not occurred here, and it has now. I'm working closely with Vincent James, Tamika Laird, DPW to ensure that there's the appropriate documentation. The role of LMPD is not to clear, it's to provide a presence for security threats, any issues there. So.
Well, that's what I'm getting here is if LMPD's role is security, I'm presuming it's Public Works Department's job to actually clean and clear. Mr. Hackett, am I wrong about that?
You're correct, and they went out there, and because there had been this email exchange, there was between Public Works and LMPD, there was the the belief that something was to happen. The problem is the people doing the email exchange were not the actual two people that were out at the site. And the miscommunication took it from being a clean to a clear. And that's where not having a formalized process that requires documentation allowed this to happen. And we should not be expecting our rank and file who are out there just the doers to be navigating this terrain, especially given that it's just so political, quite honestly.
Well, frankly, I'm of the opinion that the LMPD shouldn't be calling in the shots out there other than the security.
Oh, we don't want
The
to.
question, well, then you should be out there strictly for security, in which case, Mr. Hackett, your folks, were they taking a directive from LMPD or did somebody in your department screw up?
Again, let me be very clear. We were working together on this. It was just like Chief Shield says, it's supposed to have been just a cleaning. And it got to when we were there, as we were, the officer and our staff were talking, it got to be a clearing. Again, just like Chief Shields said, we're going to get better at making sure that none of that happens again and making sure that everybody's held accountable and making sure that we are there to ensure that this process is done better. It was just supposed to be a cleaning, but it ended up being a clearing. And so we work, in concert together, even as Tamika has already talked about, the protocols had to be followed and the protocols, unfortunately were not followed this time.
Well, would you say that Public Works needs some clarity and some training on how to handle these issues then also?
We do have clarity and we have been trained again it was, as Chief Shields has said again, we were communicating and, we're not going to sit up and put the blame on each other. It happened, unfortunately. We talked to the officers and when we talked to the officers, we try to get on the same page. And again, we should have been just a cleaning and not a clearing.
Yeah. Well, all right. Councilman Arthur, you're first in the queue, sir. You have the floor.
Peace and thank you all for being here. Chief Erika Shields, I know you mentioned a policy not being in place, but I'm looking at our 21-day protocol and LMPD is mentioned, police is mentioned in this document multiple times as a part of representation on the Homeless Encampment Task Force. Could you speak to if you were aware of this protocol? Because you said there's no guidance. Could you speak to if you were aware of it or what role LMPD was supposed to have in this process? Sure.
So yes, I'm aware of the document, but that's not an internal standard operating procedure that lays out what the guidelines are specifically for the officers. That's a broad policy. There's an ordinance on what should occur. And at the end of the day, if we're going to minimize errors within the department, the policies have to be clear and they've got to be direct and to the point. And we didn't have that here. We have truly an organic process where all the players will go out, make an assessment, do the right thing, and it worked great, kind of, up until the point this two people that had coordinated it were not the people there at the table when it was actually executed on. So we don't have an internal policy that governs this process, and that is what we have constructed this week.
And when you say we, are you referring to LMPD specifically or other agencies or combination?
LMPD specifically, but I also have ran it by Chief James to ensure that what we were doing aligned with would work well with his agency as well, his department as well.
We'd love to hear from each of the agencies represented because I think we're battling with the question of was a policy broken or is there a missing policy that needs to be in place to prevent this from happening? So from Public Works to Chief James, everyone that's on the call, could you speak to whether or not something was broken and if so, what was broken or if we're just missing something that would ensure this doesn't happen again?
I think I may be able to add some clarity to what's been contributed thus far. And I think what's clear in terms of the timing, we've been operating this process at least for the past 3 years, since the very first incident that had occurred in our city. And so from that, with the improvements that we've made and how we've been operating, we haven't had an incident since then. I think in terms of what took place, in terms of what Chief Shield has shared as the miscommunication and misunderstanding in terms of the officer's role who was making that decision on the ground. One of the things that we've done in terms of gone back and we've looked at and assessed in terms of what took place, how it took place, what types of things we can begin to do to improve it, to ensure that this doesn't take place. And we begin to put those, implement and put those things into place so that we're communicating better with all parties involved, because this is a multi-agency approach in terms of having to address it. It's not just essentially just one entity or one agency that's going to be addressing the issue. And so we recognize in terms of the role of RCS as working and building out in terms of working with the homeless population and also being able to work on the ground, as well as being able to work with a lot of our community partners. So it's something that we've seen, we've identified where the error had taken place, and then we also have put in a mitigation strategy to that so that won't happen again.
Do any other agencies have input as far as was something broken, or do we need to add something?
I think Chief James said it well, and we all been really reiterating it to make sure we follow protocols from here on out, and also improving what we already have.
Right, and he kind of alluded to some of those updates. We're going on about 12 days now, so almost 2 weeks following this incident. Could you speak to specific changes that have been made to this document?
Go ahead, Tamika, as we're talking.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
He was referring to me. Councilman Arthur, what we have done, we're actually in the process of really making those improvements now. We've spent this last 2 weeks meeting with all of the agencies, trying to go through each step, step by step, and really looking at it to see how we can strengthen the actual protocol. So that is still in process, and we will provide you with an actual final draft once the final copy once we finish it.
I'll jump to Chief Shields real quick before I pass it back to Chairman Ackerson. Chief Shields, who wrote the statement that went out from LMPD after this incident occurred?
It was one of the homeless liaison outreach officers. She was the one who had been in the discussions about the actual cleaning to occur, but she was not there when the clearing took place.
And are you aware that there were some inaccuracies in this statement?
Yes.
Okay, and just for the record, LMPD defines untruthfulness in their own policies as intentionally making a false, misleading, untrue oral or written statement, report, record, and or communication, including electronic communication. I'll pass it back to Chairman Ackerson and follow up after someone else.
Yeah, I'm going to call the next gear, but I'm just going to state for the record, we keep talking about policy. It seems to me when we talk about codes and regs, we talk about LMPD, and we talk about the Officers of Community Resilience and Services, are the RCS. At the end of the day, only one department should be calling the shots. Everyone ought to have a particular role. There ought to be coordination. But at the end of the day, it seems like in order to be effective here, there ought to be one person being the quarterback. Somebody else could be the linebacker. Somebody else could be the wide receiver. Somebody else could be the running back. But somebody's got to be calling the plays. And when you allow potentially an LMPD officer to tell Public Works, hey, get out there and let's do this. This is where the system falls apart. And next in the queue is Councilwoman McCraney. Councilwoman, can't hear you. Still can't hear you, madam. Do you mind logging off and logging back in, and I'll go ahead and take the next person and put you next in line? Councilwoman, still can't hear you. My suggestion to you would be to log off the system, and I'll make you third in line. How about that? Yes? Okay. The next in the queue is Councilwoman Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Had a question for Ms. Laird. What is the name of the homeless encampment coordinator? That person.
That would be John Miles.
Okay, thank you. And so whether it's from a council office or whether it's from 311 and you all get a complaint and you go start the investigation, where is it that the buck stops? Who is it that the buck stops with? Is there some person that is overseeing this whole operation and is aware of the details of each one of these plans, and that's who should be making the directive to for help from LMPD, for help from Mr. Hackett's office? Is that how it should work?
So the homeless encampment coordinator handles the coordination of the overall effort on everything we're doing as far as the levels, the assessment, and the closeout of the complaint. Now, it has always been in the past that it is a joint decision of the actual homeless encampment assessment core team to make the decision about the levels. Now, understanding that you all want one person to actually be the end all, the be all, to make all of the decisions for the actual assessment of those camps, that one person can't make that decision. And it is actually a joint effort between all of these agencies, because also all of them have a skill set that they bring to the table in order to do the assessment. And we need all of them to do that.
And I'm not asking for one person to make a decision. I'm asking for one person to be the spokesperson that will communicate to Mr. Hackett's office and to LMPD if their services are needed or not. I just really think that's very valuable to have that one person, because then there's no mistakes made. I mean, normally you'd be able to get that information out to those that need the help and that need to come in and help. And then there's no doubt of what needs to happen. If that one person has worked with that team and they speak for that team to LMPD and SWIMS. I mean, is there anything that's in the conversation about that happening?
Yes. So the homeless encampment coordinator makes the communication contact with the outreach groups. They actually work with the public works to make sure to schedule a date and time. They also work with LMPD. So they help with the coordination. So that would be the homeless encampment coordinator. Okay.
So let me ask you this, and I know that this scenario did not have this in it, but say it's on state property or it's on private property, then the 21 day does not, it's not enforced.
It does not apply. It does not apply.
And so then there is a waiver, is my understanding, that somebody has to sign. Say it's a private homeowner, property owner, and that LMPD can go in and say, you have to leave. I mean, is there, you act surprised that there's a waiver. I've heard that from more than one person.
So we do not handle, the protocol only handles the 21-day ordinance. And that means city-owned property. Anything that's private, state, federal, parks, metro parks, we do not actually, are not responsible to coordinate.
So who is responsible for that?
The actual owner of the property. So like federal and state would be KYTC, Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. For private property, it would be the owner. And then for metro parks, it would be the actual director over parks.
Okay, so it's a trespass waiver, I believe is what it's called. And so if
you need to LMPD needs to answer that question.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, Councilman, you're asking about doing a trespass warning?
A trespass waiver that gives, basically that the property owner, whether it be KYTC
Right.
or whether it be a private entity, they are giving, I guess, you all permission to come in and remove the people, ask them to leave with the help, hopefully, of the coalition to get them services. But I'm just trying to clarify that because there's been some question about that.
I'm going to defer to Colonel Judah. Have you heard, has that been brought to your attention, the troops been asked to do that you're aware of?
We certainly do have trespass waivers with a number of private property owners, but that's the most common, and it's generally not for issues related to homelessness, though it can be. The most common use of the trespass waiver is if a business has problems with people, say, drinking or loitering on the property, and that gives LMPD explicit authority to enforce trespassing statutes on their property. What gets murky and I believe our work with RCS and Ocean and policy development is trying to clear up whose property is it, because encampments can pop up just about anywhere. If an encampment is on someone's personal private property, then all of the restrictions within the 21-day ordinance are sort of null and void with that. They don't apply to private property. They don't apply to property owned by other governments besides Metro. So, for example, if officers were called to a vacant lot and the property owner said provided proof that was his property and wanted people removed for trespassing, that would be a different scenario. Now, what we're working on with policy development is that is a criminal offense that officers would either make a citation for or make an arrest on. We're developing a better protocol on what happens to the property that would remain in that situation. But that's a very long way of saying that the 21-day ordinance is only covering publicly owned property by Louisville Metro.
Assistant Chief Judah, I'd like you to clarify something that you just said. Can you hear me? Okay, great. You were just talking about private property. Now, on private property, the police are going to go there and remove people. Are we calling in Public Works then to remove tents and personal property? We're not doing that, are we?
No, that's on the property owner to do.
right.
On strictly private property.
So in Public Works, I mean, when for instance, what happened at the incident we're talking about here today and removal of encampments on city property, that Public Works department is the people that are actually doing the physically removing of the tents and clothing items and other things. Correct or incorrect?
Yes, that is
So
correct.
LMPD is not physically removing tents and clothing and other things, correct?
No.
Okay. So, Ms. Fowler, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. I just wanted to clarify that there are instances where the 21-day doesn't apply. Our Metro Parks is one of those. State Highway Department or state property is also one. Now, the state will come in and clean up, but they have to because they're in Jefferson County. According to them, our ordinance, they have given, I guess, a permission that we go in and remove those people after a waiver is signed. Have you worked with the State Department, Mr. Judah, to remove anybody from state highway right-of-ways or state property at all?
Historically, we have a lot of the the areas underneath interstates are state owned. So we have, and based off of my knowledge, that the team has been involved in those, and generally the practice has been following the protocols of our ordinance.
Right.
I do not believe there is a written agreement in existence, but that has been the practice.
Okay. Because I've been in conversation with Tom Wright several times this week about one that's on state property right now. And, it's an issue. And if we don't get an agreement, we're going to have all of our state right-of-ways covered with tents. And because there's no policy in place. If you don't know of that written agreement, then, or if maybe it's a gentleman's agreement, I don't know, but it could be an issue. And I think we really need to clarify and make sure that we have concise guidelines in place for that as well. That's all of my questions, Councilman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman McCraney, you're back in, so you're up. I can't hear you, madam. I understand. I apologize. All right. Next to the queue is Councilwoman Purvis. Councilwoman Purvis? She must have some
She left the meeting.
Okay.
I saw them saying she left the meeting.
Next in the queue is Councilwoman Armstrong. Councilwoman Armstrong. Okay. Next to the queue is Councilman Kramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is just really kind of I'm seeking clarity here. It sounded like from Tamika's, Ms. Laird's overall, like this is kind of the big picture approach. A call comes into 311 to notify the city that folks have set up an encampment on government property at some location. And then within 48 hours, we try to get someone out there to determine what that looks like and what that means. If it is an encampment in an area, well, I guess an encampment on any public property is technically illegal. So that they would then make a determination how to move forward. And then at some point, if it's deemed necessary to remove that encampment, they give 21 days notice. And it sounds like, and this is me seeking clarity only. It sounds like what we're basically saying is a group of individuals could set up camp on Metro Louisville property and could plan on being there for 30 days before they could be removed. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. Because we're posting the 21-day notice. So that's 21 days, but prior to the 21 days, we have to give 3 days, we have to give 3 days notice to the coalition. So you're looking at about 24 days in overall.
So anybody that wanted to could just come in, pick a place in Metro Louisville, set up camp, and plan on staying there for 30 days before they could possibly be removed?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and we're going to go back to Councilwoman Armstrong, who had to step away for a second, but she's back. Councilwoman, you have the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, as you all can see, I'm juggling childcare this evening. So when the baby says that you're going to step away, you're going to step away. And thank you for your understanding. So my question, and Mr. Chair, you tell me if this is an appropriate time to start asking this. I actually had some questions about the EMW clinic incident. Is it okay if I go ahead and ask those?
No, that's not okay at the moment. We're going to deal with that issue next.
Okay. Well, then in that case, I'll with my. I just want to reiterate that I do think that my main concern was in hearing what is actually changed in response to the incident. I am hopeful that it does sound like specific changes are being made. However, I'm going to be looking carefully to see how those are implemented. So thank you for your time, and I'll reserve my questions until we move on to the EMW discussion. Thank you,
madam. The next in the queue is Council President James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank everybody for being here today. I just had a couple of questions, and it relates to something that I heard earlier about when the 21-day notice applies to Metro properties, and I heard that it doesn't apply to Metro Parks, which is a Metro property. And I was just wondering if someone could answer why that is.
In the ordinance under, I believe it's section, I'm sorry, I'm working on bringing it up. In the ordinance under section.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I may be able to help on this question. What we did, President James, is amend an existing ordinance that the council had passed a long time ago about camping. Where camping was allowed, where it wasn't allowed. So we actually used an existing ordinance and then put in the 21-day notice for homeless camps. That ordinance did not apply. And so that's the reason we did not expand the areas that the ordinance applied to, and it did not include parks. It only included other Louisville Metro government properties.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you very much for the clarification. And then I guess the follow-up question to that is, I noticed that in my district, for example, I-65 cuts through my district, and there's a lot of homeless encampments that occur underneath the overpasses. And I've seen where the fences that would normally have blocked off access to those underpasses have been either rolled back, cut away. Is that happening by Metro government? Is the highway department doing that? Are the people that are living under there doing that? And who's responsible for repairing those fences?
Keith, are you going to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of give a background on some of the older camps. And when we were working with the highway department, the fences were so destroyed that we took them down. And also, honestly, it helps us to get back into cleaning them up on a regular basis. And then, with homeless camps, if those fences are down, people are not more likely to stay there. But it also gave us access to ensure that to clean them up when they got dirty again. And we had to talk to KYTC about replacing them. But at this point, they did not replace them. At this point, because they were so damaged. So many of them, particularly your district, happened all at the same time. This is early. I think we did this back in 2018, and kind of to deter people from going up under there because of security. Those fences were not put back up because people wouldn't stay up, most likely would not stay under it. And also that it would enable us, if people were there, because the signs are posted about no camping, we can go back and clean them pretty quickly, because we're cleaning these things every single day. And some of them we're cleaning twice a day. So it kind of helps with the efficiency. And be honest with you, before this meeting, I rode through there, and they are surprisingly clean for the most part compared to what they used to be when the fence was there. Things would get ripped down and torn. It kind of helped us to maintain it a little better. But again, we can talk to KYTC about putting those things back up, but it actually helps us keep them clean.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. I was listening to the conversations about responsible parties in Metro government, And I recognize that mistakes were made and efforts are being made to make sure that those mistakes aren't made again. But I find it kind of hard to understand how we're not going to have, I have not heard that we're going to have someone that's ultimately responsible overall to make that happen. I know that there's the homeless encampment coordinator, but I'm assuming that coordinator has a supervisor of some sort, so that whatever's going to happen, someone has signed off on saying, yes, we're going to clean this camp, or yes, we're going to clear this camp, or yes, the 21-day notice has been put in place. And I'm just asking, have you all as department heads had any conversations related to that in any way, shape, or form? And how is that progressing as we move through these policy and protocol adjustments?
President James, thank you for asking that question. And we have been looking at that. It's what we've been doing, as Ms. Lear had shared earlier, in terms of the past 2 weeks, in terms of looking at the process itself, looking at it from the beginning to the end. Because one way that you minimize mistakes in processes is take the human error out of it. And so in putting together a process map in terms of looking at how things actually function and looking at the gaps, where those gaps lie, and as well as what checkoff points need to happen as it relates to individuals signing off. So there's a clear chain of command as it relates to, what the recommendations are, who's signing off, but in all parties are being, having to sign off. So we're looking at having all those things in place. I think something that has been missing in this conversation in terms of understanding for, 3 years that this system has been functioning and it's been working, efficiently. This is the first incident since the original incident that sparked all of this. So it's been working. This particular incident happened as a result of a miscommunication. And we've seen in terms from understanding through looking at the process map, and we're still fleshing that out because it's really complex because of all the agencies that are working together to make this happen. So what we're trying to do with the process mapping is simplifying the process, making sure we have the correct checkoff points. And then there's a final person who says, okay, I've seen all of this. This is approved. You're absolutely right that has to happen. But heretofore, we haven't had any incidents. And so there hasn't really been a need to adjust it. But we always are looking for ways in which we can continuously improve. And this is an opportunity that we're taking now to improve a process that had been working. We want to make it better.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I'm glad to hear that's taking place. Do you have a timeline about when you think that process will be completed?
We're currently now working in terms of meeting. There's going to be various phases to that. And what I mean by that in terms of the initial clarity of the process itself. Because when you're working out a process map, oftentimes when what you think the process is actually not what it actually is. You really don't discover that until you dig deeper in every aspect of the process to really understand, okay, this is happening, it's not. So that's taking some time because of the complexities, as the interagencies are working together to make it happen. So we're near finishing with the initial process map that would then, the next step would be to begin to look at where those sign-up points would be, how we're going to function differently, if anything needs to be changed, and moving toward that. So we're moving at a pace in terms of, executing that process to be able to come up with a workable solution that we will be glad to share with, the council so that you can understand in terms of how it all works.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chief James, I just want to comment on that. And I don't mean to sound rude, but it likely probably will sound rude. And that's where what I don't get is, it was a bit efficient, but then we had this problem. And the problem clearly appears to be that there's nobody really in charge of making sure that the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. To me, it doesn't seem like that we're trying to solve rocket science here. Like we need to have multiple committees and discuss various policies. It seems to me like you get 1, 2, or 3 people, and if it's 3 people, we call it a little sub-department that gets themselves a checklist. If a camp's to be removed or if there's any problem, you got to have one of those 3 people in that department sign off saying all this stuff's taking place. That department's in charge of coordinating with Public Works or that person's in charge of coordinating Public Works, the police, and RCS to make sure that everything's taking place. This won't happen again if there is 1 or 2 or just a few people that are able to give the final go-ahead, press the green light button to say it happens now because they verified this stuff. To me, it doesn't seem like it should be as complicated as the city's making it as far as how to solve this problem. So next to the queue is Councilman Arthur. Councilman Arthur, you have the floor.
Peace. I'd like to just also encourage you all and ask you all, demand of you all to make sure you include people who do actual homeless outreach when you have those meetings to talk about the process changing, because I'm looking at a screen full of people who are all in their homes and they don't do homeless outreach. And we're talking about protocol for encampments with people who don't go to encampments. So I wanted to lift that up. Chief Shields, you mentioned earlier that an officer who does outreach created that statement. Were you referring to Officer Jessica Morrison from the Mobile Response Unit?
Correct, yes.
Okay, I've seen in different media reports throughout the weeks, Beth Ruoff, I think that's her name, making some of those statements from the statement that went out from LMPD. Did she have any say or any input in what this statement was? Because that's not Officer Jessica Morrison.
Oh, so we're talking about different statements then?
I'm referring to the statement that went on LMPD's Facebook. I'm referring to the statement that was texted to me by Wanda Mitchell-Smith the evening of the incident, as well as a statement that went to an email to Metro Council members.
So no, that's just the PIO putting the statement out. I'm not sure what the particular concern is then, if that's the statement you're referencing.
I'm just referring to the fact that there was matters of untruthfulness in this message that went out, that you acknowledged there was untruth in it. And I just wanted to have an understanding of who put that statement out.
No, I felt that there was inaccuracies in the statement that went out by Officer Morrison, namely in line 1, it was miscommunication between LMPD and sanitation. And the reality of it is the miscommunication was solely within LMPD. So that was the statement I was referring to. I'm not sure what specifically then, if we're not both referring to that statement, what your concern is.
Well, the concern is that there were lies in the statement, and you acknowledged that untruth. And I just wanted to have an understanding of who wrote it and what went out.
No, to be clear, if we roll back, you asked me, did I feel that there was an inaccuracy in a statement? You and I were talking about clearly 2 different statements. So we're going to, right there, I've not said there's an untruth. Now, if you believe there's an untruth in what Officer Roof put out as a PIO, what exactly is the untruth? Let's address that.
Well, I think that's a conversation you should have with your officers. Jessica Morrison, who I'm texting now, and said she had nothing to do with that statement. And it was very different from the original email that she sent to a number of providers. Natalie Harris from the Coalition from the Homeless, who forwarded it to me. So there seems to be a miscommunication within LMPD. But I want to move on to another question about where these complaints came from, because earlier it was mentioned that businesses have complained, but nothing was actually sent to RCS in terms of actual follow through. Could someone from LMPD or maybe a different department speak to what some of these businesses and these entities near the encampment asked of LMPD when they put those complaints in?
Correct. So there's a property owner down there who's leasing out space, and there was a daycare and a restaurant that are due to open in March. There was an employee down there who got apparently alleged that they got slapped on their backside by one of the individuals living under the tent. So it was the property owner who had reached out to LMPD.
And just for clarification, that was never sent to RCS.
That wouldn't correct. That was not. That I am aware of. I don't believe that it was.
Once something comes to LMPD, whose responsibility is it to put it through 311 or send it to Tamika? What does that look like?
Well, and that's the point of all of this. There hasn't been a defined process. So what's occurred is the LMPD outreach folks or the downtown improvement folks will coordinate with Public Works. They'll coordinate with homeless outreach and say, we're getting complaints in this area. We need to take action here. And by not having an established practice, this is how stuff has fallen off. So now the new policy that we've drafted is that any complaints received by LMPD will go to Tamika Laird's shop so that we can formalize the process. So hopefully we can eliminate incidents like these in the future.
Right. And just to acknowledge, we have 2 officers who do homeless outreach, but you're saying there was never any formal process for them to get these cases or get these complaints. It would usually just go whichever way you all felt, whoever got that complaint or got that call.
No, I'm saying that when they would get the complaint, they would work with the homeless outreach providers, public works, people from Tamika Laird's office. So it was one of these processes that was working, but through email, through phone calls, but not a defined, this is your role, these are your responsibilities, and these are the limitations on your role.
Tamika, could you speak to when you know to go and assess something? I know we talked the other day and you said you assess everything, but could you just speak to that really quickly about how you know when to go out and look at something?
When we receive the complaint. Once we receive the complaint, that's the initiation for us to go out and do the assessment. And so that is actually routed. It can be routed 3 different ways. So let me make sure I make that clear. So the majority of our complaints, the homeless encampment complaints, come through 311. We do receive some complaints from the mayor's office, and we do receive some complaints from council. We actually work all of those complaints once we receive them to verify first if it's on federal, state, federal, private parks or city owned. Once we determine what property owner is, who owns the property, that determines exactly what our next steps are. So from there, once we find out it's city owned, then we actually pull together the core assessment team to go out and assess the actual location that we received the complaint on. Now, if it's on any other properties that are not city owned, we actually send a notification to 311, letting them know that this is on private property and that it's not under the actual ordinance. And so that way they can respond back to the complaint or send notification. I don't know how 311 works on the other side, but we ask them to close it out, and this is the actual resolution.
You know, somebody who's key and missing on this call is Marilyn Harris from the Office of Housing. And I just talked with Marilyn yesterday about the fact we need 31,000 plus units to house the people at the lowest income. And you're telling me whenever we clear a public space that's technically being controlled by private citizens who have any complaint in the world and no record of those complaints, as we just found out earlier, we move people around, we displace people, and then where do we send them? And I know you might say that we might send them to a shelter. Where do we send them if we know that people are walking around with vouchers and they don't have housing? If there's no housing, we don't know how much housing we've created. So we're just moving people around, displacing them month after month, and they have nowhere to go. Or is there somewhere they go that's safe and reasonable?
Are you asking for a response from me on that question, or is it
from anyone? Where are we taking people when we displace them from what is essentially their only shelter at that moment in time?
It's unfortunate that they're relocated to another area. I mean, majority of the time we do let them know that shelter beds are available, and they have been available throughout this emergency. Throughout every day, there's shelter beds available. I see it through our single point of entry. They send out notification to all of the actual outreach that there are shelter beds available for them to be able to come inside. But the hardship is that we don't have anywhere for these individuals to go. We don't. And so they are relocated. They are relocated wherever outreach can determine a spot for them to go.
And jumping to Chief Vincent James, we relocated people from Jefferson Square Park not too long ago. And to my understanding, they received rapid housing vouchers, or they were about to receive rapid housing vouchers. Is that correct?
Yes, we've relocated them. One of the things that happened and worked with that, and what another process of this whole 21-day notice and all the things you were talking about in terms of working, understanding in terms of what RCS works with, and then also understanding what happens after that with our community partners that we work with. And so in this instance, in terms of with several of the clients that were there, we have an assessment that actually takes place with those individuals. Because they were all located in one location and they had someone that was working with them on the ground, we were able to communicate, with them and work with our teams and partners in the community to be able to, put things together a lot faster than normally what we would see in a normal situation. And so with those individuals, many of them had qualified for the vouchers and in terms of being involved in that system and the program, and there were some that did not. I think Tamika would have the actual numbers of how many did qualify and those who didn't, that they were going into a different program.
So I just want to point out, we found rapid housing vouchers for people who were at Jefferson Square Park, who were in deplorable conditions, which we can all agree on, from feces being on the ground to them just living outside, which some of us can't even think about or fathom. But moving to people who are displaced, people who are unsheltered, people who are living under the expressway, all over this city, people who are living outside, we are really in a situation where we're not finding anything for them and they're kind of hidden. But when we have people who are out in the open, we're quick to get rid of them and displace them and not have anywhere for them to go. I just want to clarify that's what was just said and what was decided.
In terms of what happens is that we have a outreach team that works with those individuals who, in the process of the 21-day clearing, they're working with those individuals who are in those camps to be able to identify housing shelter for them. They're not just being kicked to the side. They actually are working with them to get them in one of the shelters, or even if there's a program opportunity for them, whatever in terms of the system would dictate, that's what we're helping those individuals. Our whole goal is taking people from the streets to housing. That's ultimately the goal. One of the things we can recognize that, in our community, and one of the things that you alluded to as well, is that we have a tremendous housing shortage. When you get into that conversation, you're talking about people with vouchers who can't find the housing because we can't find and identify housing at a market rate. And there's a whole lot of complexities along with that. I think what you're really getting to, and you're absolutely right, that we need to continually look at our system in terms of what types of things we have in place, and also that necessitates in terms of where the dollars are going to be invested, because we truly have a housing shortage, and we cannot at this juncture in terms of where we are really adequately address the complexities of the homeless issue until definitely we get the housing issue.
Right. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of why the people at Jefferson Square Park got sent to hotels and they got rapid housing vouchers, but the people who are displaced elsewhere get sent to shelters. That's what we're saying today?
No, they get, in terms of depending on the individual case. And I think in terms of, Tamika could really explain in terms of the detail as to how that happens with the assessment and the various programs that they would be afforded. Based on those assessments, based on those ratings, there's a whole process in place in terms that works with our assessment team that goes out, our partners that actually are doing those assessments, and then identifying places in terms of where they will be able to, where we would be able to provide shelter.
Right. And I look forward to working with everyone on this so-called housing shortage, understanding that LMHA has more evictions than any property management in town combined. So if we have a housing shortage, but LMHA is evicting people left and right, where's the disconnect? I want to ask this last question of everyone before I stop beating up on y'all and we file this ordinance. I'm wondering, and I'd like to hear from each of our agencies here, if someone walked into your home, stole your food, threw it away, threw away any other supplies, would you consider that a criminal act? Is everyone frozen, or are we confused about the question, or what?
Could you repeat the question?
If someone walked into your home, stole your food, stole any supplies from your home and threw it away or damaged it, did whatever they did to it, would you consider that a criminal act?
For me, it's going to depend on whether they're a friend or not. And that would be a very mean friend to come and do that.
Okay. And now I'll switch the perspectives here. we as a city not only stepped into someone's so-called home, but we destroy their home, we throw it away, we get rid of it, and then LMPD says sorry, and we're supposed to just keep it pushing, turn the other cheek, so to speak. Do we understand why that's an issue? And that something needs to happen outside of we're meeting and having secret meetings and we'll figure out what the policy is and tell you later. I just want to make sure we understand the severity of what happened 2 weeks ago.
And I would respond to that and say, we absolutely understand the severity of what took place. In terms, there's not a person on this call that is working within government and that's working with people that does not understand it. We understand the severity of it. I think one of the things, we have to constantly look at, and even from understanding from a humanitarian perspective, we're dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with their personal possessions, and that's all they have. And what is it that we can do as a city, a compassionate city, to bring about that compassion to the very most vulnerable people that we see in our communities, in our streets? And that's a constant effort that we have to continuously work toward and continue to recognize by having your finger on the pulse of what's happening, understanding why it's happening, and understand what things need to be changed as it relates to inequities that you see in terms of those who are less fortunate, don't have the means and access. How do we as a government, how do we as a city, how do we as a community begin to address those things collectively together? And I think that's some of the passion in terms of why we do what we do, because we want to serve people. So we completely understand Councilman Arthur in terms of the severity of what took place.
I'm going to toss it back to the chairman, but I would argue that you don't understand and you don't care and we're not compassionate because you have been telling media that you won't comment on this ever again until we had to bring you into this committee. I'll pass it back to the chairman.
Yeah, and folks, I know there's a few still in the queue. Right now I've got Councilman Hollander, Councilman Triplett, and Councilman Reed. But I want to jump back because we had some problems with two of our council colleagues. Councilwoman McCraney and Councilwoman Purvis have both had some previous problems with their systems. So we're going to start off and see if Councilwoman McCraney has solved her problem, and if so, I would give her the mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
We got you now.
Okay, so the problem has been fixed. Well, that's the problem of my mic anyway. I am looking forward to the problem that we are faced with today being fixed. The bottom line is we're all adults and we're very intelligent adults. And I know that it can be fixed. You should not ever have to come before a Metro Council and answer to something so simple as this. And I hope that you won't have to do that again. So that's where I'll lay my remarks for tonight. I'm glad you're here and I'm looking forward to this being solved so that we don't have to cross these paths again. Thank you.
Councilwoman Purvis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, my system went down while Councilwoman Fowler was asking questions. So my remarks are going to kind of be in line with what she was asking. And actually, she was asking who was the homeless coordinator. She was asking the question to Ms. Laird, and I don't see her anymore. Okay, she was asking the question to Ms. Laird to identify who the homeless coordinator was, and I think you said John Miles. Well, quite frankly, I don't think it matters if it's John Miles or John Doe. If you all were not aware of what was going on, the shifting of the blame to RCS is not appropriate if they were not involved. Am I correct in saying so, Ms. Laird? Can't hear you.
You are correct.
Okay, so it doesn't matter who the coordinator is if they did not know anything about the situation that was taking place. So that brings me back to the initial complaint going into 311. So the personnel at 311 is the one that sent it to the police department, correct?
I'm not for sure how they received the complaint. I believe Chief spoke to that. Chief Shields, can you? Yeah.
And I'm sorry, like I said, I went off and took me like 10 minutes to get back on. I'm sorry, Chief Shields, if you have
Councilwoman, what was previously testified to before this committee by the chief essentially was that complaints were made to LMPD. What was also testified to is there is no documentation of any complaints. So there's nothing, there's no record from 311, no record from no paper trail showing anything other than somebody saying that there was, verbally saying there was a complaint, but there's no paper trail evidence of such.
Okay. Thank you. That clarifies my question I had in that regards. Okay. So, and I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again. Okay. So this was just a collaboration between LMPD and Public Works, right? This whole clearing of this camp. This was LMPD and Public Works working together, correct?
LMPD and Public Works, and then they did include on the email the Office of Resiliency and Community Services, but the actual dialogue on the email was between LMPD and Public Works.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next to the queue is Councilman Hollander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for being here. As some of you know, I was communicating with you the night this happened. My goal has always been that it not happen again, and I think we're, moving toward that. I do want to comment. I mean, I think what happened here, we have to understand that we probably need some policies, not just at LMPD, but at RCS as well, and particularly at Public Works. And I'm not saying that Works or RCS did anything wrong. I mean, it sounds to me like what happened here is, a police officer said, do this. And Public Works said, okay. And we just have to sort of understand that's the kind of power dynamic, isn't it? That when a police officer tells you to do something, you do it. But I think that Public Works has to have a policy saying, no, we're not going to do that unless we have a 21-day notice. So I hope that there will be looking at policies, not just at LMPD, but also at Public Works. We are talking about some changes to the ordinance, and we'll continue to do that, and we'll get back into more of that later. The hour's getting late. I am encouraged by the fact, though, that I think there's a broad acknowledgement that this was not a loophole in the ordinance. This was not something that allowed this to happen. This was a mistake that violated the ordinance, if you will. And I'm not trying to call out anybody for violation, but this should not happen under the ordinance as it is currently written. Does everybody agree with that? Anybody disagree with that?
Yes, sir, Councilman Fowler.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just one final point to get to Jacory's point. We are just moving people around the county, and we just have to be really honest about this. I mean, we have moved people, and I have talked to people who have been moved 3 and 4 and 5 times. And what we're trying to do is to move them to less visible locations. And it's not solving any problem. And it's causing an enormous use of public resources to do it. So we do have to get to a better solution than that. I hope we can talk about using some affordable housing money for some real housing solutions for people who are houseless. Now, we're spending a lot of money on affordable housing. Not a lot of it has been directed to people who are without housing. Now, that's an expensive proposition. It requires services in addition to actual physical housing. But I hope we can talk about it this year as part of this budget process, because, while I think the ordinance has worked in terms of 21 days and in terms of having people there and trying to provide what services we can, we just have to be honest about this. We are simply moving people from place to place to place to place. We can say you can go to a shelter, but there are a lot of people who don't want to go to a shelter. And frankly, go to a shelter yourself and decide if you'd like to go to that shelter. there aren't very many people who will say, I don't want to go to an apartment. And I think we have to continue to work to get people that opportunity. Thank you.
And Bill, I'd just like to add a caveat to that, and that is not only moving people from place to place, but every time we move them, they're further hurt. They lose items, or they're being forced to relocate in foul weather. And at the end of the day, they're already the downtrodden. And so every time we force them to move somewhere else, we further push them further down. So, but you are correct, sir. Next in the queue, I believe, is Councilman Triplett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone. What a wonderful debate. It's unfortunately took an unfortunate incident to bring us back to the table for this crucial issue that affects every single one of us, every district. No district is immune from this growing problem that we have with homeless people. Some of our districts are hit quite hard. Mine is one. And that's why I'm so grateful to have everybody here. And I'm very, very grateful for all the players involved. LMPD, RCS, you guys have been listening to me for a couple of years now, advocating to improve what we're already doing, and I'm so grateful for what you're doing, but there is room for improvement, and not just because there was one incident that took place a couple of weeks ago. There's just so many moving parts. I think we can all agree to address this enormous, and also too, the fact that the way that the homeless issue that we had a year ago is not the same homeless issue we have today. It's changed. It's enormous. It's growing. It in and of itself has a lot of moving parts to it as well. But our approach, and that's what we're talking about here, our approach, I have no problem with the waiting period or the 21-day notice. It's fair. It's humane. It was the right thing to do, and that's why this body did it. So we need to uphold and honor that. Now, we have a lot of players involved here, and I want to ask something very quick. I know we've been here for a while. The new mobile response unit, is that going to either help us avoid such difficulties, or are we going to add another layer? Vincent or Tamika, maybe you would like to respond to that.
I need just some clarity around the question when you talk about mobile response unit. Are you referring to looking at in terms of deflection model that we're working with the University of Louisville? Is that what you're referencing?
Well, no, the mobile response unit that we wanted to budget for, the one that would be primarily for West and downtown, West Louisville downtown.
You didn't fund that. The council did not fund it because they had already determined that we had the same scope of work in LMPD, and you all had already allocated funding in LMPD for the same purpose.
Okay, well, as Councilman Hollander alluded to, at budget time, so this issue's going to come back up. All right, and among other aspects for this to help us in our approach to this growing problem. Now, also, Tamika, very quickly, you talked about the assessment and all the players, the partner agencies that go into helping when you go out on site and offer the assessment. Who are these players? How many of them? 5, 6, half a dozen?
So it's Codes and Regs, Public Works, LMPD, and then RCS is 4, and then sometimes it's Public Health and Wellness.
So none of the other
level 3. If it's a level 3, it's Public Health and Wellness.
Okay, so I guess I was expecting to hear some of the other nonprofit partners that we have, like Waste.
Oh, you're talking about the outreach groups.
All of the outreach groups, are none of them involved in the assessment process?
No. They are involved in the 21-day posting. So the outreach groups do show up to provide assistance and supportive services.
Is Morrison and Yoshi involved in the assessment?
They have, yes. They have, but it's more or less whoever the officer is at the time in the past. But now, because they're the homeless encampment liaison officers, I believe that they're going to be utilized quite a bit moving forward.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I appreciate the work that they do. And all of you, don't get me wrong. I so appreciate every effort that you're making. I just as we mentioned a few minutes ago, we're displacing people. We're just moving people around. But also, too, on the other hand, we're allowing people to stay in some spots. This too, is a problem. If we're not moving them, they're allowed to stay. So we have just it's a two-headed monster, multi-headed monster, and I welcome all of your help on this as we move forward to really get our arms around this issue, whether it's with affordable housing, homeless, the needs, the partnerships, everything involved, because it's going to take a lot. And I'm so grateful for tonight's discussion. Mr. Chair, thank you so much for the time.
Councilman Reed, you are next in the queue, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I won't be long. What I'm hearing, it's been in business for quite some time. What I'm hearing is that we don't have written processes. We don't have follow-up on those processes. We don't have testing of those processes. It's good that we're starting to write them, but unless we do write them, this is going to happen again. So I also recognize that Chief Shields, you've been on the force now for in charge for less than 2 months, so it's kind of unfair to expect this to come out of your area this quickly. However, I would just simply encourage all of these areas, all these departments to talk to each other, and it's best, and I'm going to talk ideally here, and I realize we're talking about government, so this may be pie in the sky stuff, but it would be best to have one document that includes input from every agency that is affected, rather than having 3 separate documents with 3 separate standing operating procedures. So that's me. That's my recommendation. You know, until we actually get things in writing and they're tested, this may happen again. I wouldn't be surprised, God forbid, that it did. So thank you, and I appreciate it. Back to the chair.
Councilwoman Fowler is the last in the queue on this topic, and then we'll move on to the other topic. Councilwoman Fowler, you have the floor.
Councilman, Chairperson Atkinson, I would like to respond to Councilmember Reed's statement.
Leonard, you have the floor.
Thank you. We have protocols in place. We have procedures in place. We have been following those procedures for the last 3 years. Now, what happened here was a mistake, and I agree. It was a lapse in communication. And we are trying to make it better by strengthening the overall protocol and the standard operating procedure. And that's how we're moving forward.
Ask you a question?
Absolutely. Sure can.
Is there a written document? Is a written formal process document?
There is. Yes, there is. And actually, if you heard Councilmember Arthur, he actually referenced it in his actual questions.
Okay, so then what we're doing now then is tweaking the existing process document.
That is correct.
Okay, and I did hear Chief Shields say that as far as she was concerned, LMPD have a process document, and I'm not sure about Chief James. But if that's the case, then good. Appreciate your candor, and let's get this thing right. Thank you.
Councilwoman Fowler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to go back to something Councilman Hollander said about just moving them elsewhere, and it'd be great if they would all cooperate, and if given the opportunity to use a voucher, or if some suitable solution was given them. But what I'm experiencing in my district are many that are loners, so to speak, and there's a mental illness component to the issue. And so it's one of the reasons they're loners is because they can't function in a group setting. But one poor lady in particular has been moved, or she has moved herself. I don't know if she's been moved, but I do know she's been offered jobs. She's been offered housing. She's been offered things that she did not take them up on. And I think it really is the mental illness aspect. And until we fix that, we're going to continue to have this problem. Because, I know of about a year and a half that she has gone from 4 different districts. And right now she's in mine, very close to a elementary school, right on their property line, actually. And, the neighbors, the families, the school, they want her gone because she scares people. And so, what do you do? What do we do about that? I know we've got to do something to help her, but she refuses to help. So, that's the big question I'm going to leave everybody with, because it is an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. At this point, we're going to move to item number 5 on the agenda, ID 210240, special discussion with Louisville Metro Police Chief Erika Shields concerning police presence at EMW Women's Surgical Center on Saturday, February 20th, 2021. With that being said, Chief Shields, if you'd like to give us a little summary of what's taken place and what's being done to address it.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm limited in what I can say, and that's due to state law 67C, which has a gag order on police departments when an investigation is ongoing. So what I would ask of you would be very helpful is if you all would lobby the state to lift this gag order, because I think it runs completely contrary to transparency. Speaking broadly, I did receive, it was multiple individuals had expressed to me concern that we had an employee, a readily identifiable employee, participating in the pro-life protests. Subsequent to this information, we did open up an internal investigation. And we will be looking at the employee's conduct along with the policies that govern employee conduct in this area. And again, I really wish I could be more direct, but this is where, if you ever want to help get the department to be in a more transparent space, that state law does not fit the environment we are operating in today. I will answer questions to the best that I can, but please understand the limitations on me are not by choice.
Councilman Armstrong, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief Shields, for being here today. We were going to meet this afternoon to discuss some of these issues. I was actually at the EMW Surgical Center on Saturday, slightly after this incident occurred, and you had to cancel that meeting because of something that came up. And I look forward to getting that meeting back on the books, because the way I see it is this is a particular incident that speaks to a long-standing series of issues that clinic has had in getting sort of law enforcement to respond and take the things that are happening there seriously. So I was at EMW that day. I went down because I was trying to understand for myself the need for a safety zone. Parked in the garage, made the walk all the way from the garage to the clinic door, had sort of people following me, blocking me on the sidewalk the entire way. I will say Councilman Arthur actually notified me whenever I got in my vehicle to drive down there that there had been this officer who was seen protesting. I will say I was nervous about going down to EMW because I know that the protesters have a history of using these sorts of aggressive tactics to block people. I had actually told my husband, well, the police will be there if anything happens, because he was worried as well. And to find out then that there was a police officer who had been protesting just a few hours earlier and see that image that we've all seen on social media was very disconcerting, and quite frankly made me feel very unsafe as a member of the public planning to use a public sidewalk to go up to a healthcare facility. I think everyone, it seems to me that we can all agree that if a police officer was in fact there in uniform carrying his government-issued sidearm and his government-issued car, that would be a problem. Even the fact that we're dealing with these allegations is a huge breach of trust for EMW, the providers, the patient community, the people in that community. And so my question for you is, what steps are you going to take? And this isn't just in response to this incident, right? This is the ongoing history of EMW saying we have these protesters who are obstructing sidewalks. There are noise issues. There have been assault issues. I personally was followed over 2 minutes from the time I left the EMW clinic back to the garage by an unmasked woman who was right here. I can show you or any other council members the full video. To me, it seems that there are clearly issues going on there, and these issues haven't been sort of elevated and getting the attention they deserve. So my question for you is, in light of this history, in light of this as a breaking point that really brings a lot of these issues to the forefront, and really makes this particular community see LMPD as an enemy, quite frankly, and someone who's not on their side and not enforcing the law and not there to help them, what steps are you willing to take to rebuild that trust? Would you be willing to appoint an officer as a liaison to the EMW clinic, for example?
Well, and thank you, Councilwoman. And yes, I'm sorry to cancel. I was double booked, and that's totally on the scheduling staff there. What I would say is I would like to hear more from you. I think what I need to get my arms around is how much of this is occurring on public property. What are their tactics? I completely, from where I'm sitting, it is imperative that our officers do not immerse themselves in any action that can be deemed political, because we've lost all credibility at that point. And I think that it's fair to say that anything is political if there's a desire for a public policy action on the subject. So to me, looking internally, I don't feel that the policy governing our officers in this space, and not just talking the clinic, but just broadly, is written as thoroughly as it should be. And I realize as an outsider, you may say, well, let me back up this. It's easy to say, well, why do you need a policy? What's the purpose of a policy? Here's what I would say to you. You all do not agree with one another and how we should handle things. Now take that times 500,000 in a community. So the policy has to be written in such a manner that we are presenting LMPD in a space that is acceptable to all. And the way you get there when you're dealing with human beings is to be as pointed as you can in your direction. I feel as though the policy here needs to be better written, officers need to be retrained on it, and we need to be clear on the expectations of our officers. As far as the concerns around safety as it applies to the clinic, I'm happy to meet with you. I'm happy to meet with the director and see and hear what the specific concerns are and move forward from there, from that space.
Thank you. And yes, I do look forward to having that conversation. There's, we had prepared all sorts of documentation around the number of incidents that have occurred. It's really been a public safety issue quite in all kinds of different ways. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So the only other question that I want to ask right now is just if you yourself are aware of the fact that some of these local protesters do have ties to national organizations that advocate violence, and that some of those organizations were represented at the riot and the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. Have you been made aware of that information?
No, I can't say that I have been. No.
Okay. Well, we've put together some of that documentation, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. This is, in my mind, just a jumping off point for a larger conversation about public safety. And thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, we'll get it.
Councilman Arthur, you have the floor.
Before I address Chief Shields, I just want to make sure for the rest of our colleagues, this doesn't turn into a debate about whether or not this officer was protesting and whether or not they should have been protesting. I've seen the video with my own two eyes. I can forward it to you. This officer was indeed protesting. And in terms of if they should have been protesting, it is written within LMPD policy that they are not supposed to be participating in political activity, as Chief Shields just pointed out, unless there's a mention of advertisements and commodities and commercial enterprise identified as an officer. And it talks about the chief approving of some of these actions. And Chief Shields, I would assume you did not approve of this officer's actions, correct?
No, that is correct.
Okay. And you mentioned changes to this policy. Could you speak to suggestions that you have in mind as far as changing it and adding some more clarity around it?
I just, I haven't come up with the draft on it yet, but I think it's a one-liner, and I think that we could be more clear because what people are going to focus on is qualifying what applies as political and what doesn't, as opposed to the broader picture of, is your conduct unbecoming to the department or causing issues for the department. And I'm not wording this well, but allow me to say, I feel as though, although I'm a huge fan of doing things succinctly, I can honestly say that this particular policy is too narrow. It's too narrow. That being said, there's also state law that I know I've just talked with some of the attorneys on that prohibits some of these activities in uniform. I think the state law is a little more appropriately written. So we just need to be knowing people seek loopholes. And I'm not saying that this happened here, but we really just have to cover the bases so we're clear on what is acceptable and what is not.
Do you believe political beliefs for this officer impacts their abilities to do their job?
Oh, you know what, to be fair, I want to see the file. I think for me, where I sit is what is and any individual who's getting caught up in something like that's this level, this type of controversy, is what is their social media postings? How have they conducted themselves in the past? Is there a broader issue, or is this just someone expressing free speech and doing it in a manner that would not have been problematic had they not been associated immediately with LMPD?
Given that there are probably thousands of documents at this point from the EMW clinic and their staff in the Louisville Safety Zone for all the work that they do in protecting people going in and out of this clinic, in your findings, if you discovered that LMPD was complicit in what was happening there in terms of harassment of patients, would you be willing to advocate for a buffer zone to protect not only the people who are going in there to seek services, but also the protesters who might come into physical altercations or contact with people?
I think that's for another discussion. I want to see first what the investigation is showing, and I want to meet with the folks from the clinic and hear their concerns, the more broadly concerns, and see what exactly has been occurring.
Right. And just to clarify before I let this go, we know that the officer was protesting. We know that there's some sort of bias at play here. And we also know that people have been harassed at this clinic. And you're saying you don't know whether or not their political beliefs come into play as far as them being able to carry out and enforce laws on that public sidewalk?
No, I think what I would say is and this goes back to, as human beings, for some of you, it's viewed as bias, and for others, it's viewed as prayer. And so that's where, as an employer, it's not black and white. And the policies have to be written in such a manner so that the subjectivity is taken away. And that's the space that I'm in now. I've not seen this file. I don't know. And I need to let it run its course so I can see what we come up with.
One follow-up really quickly. I know you can't speak about this specific case, but what are the typical consequences when these policies are broken? And I'm referring to policy 5.119, 5.110 in regards to official credentials being used, and then the line about politics. What's typical in terms of consequences when these are broken?
Honestly, I would need to get with the IA commander and do a premise history to see what has been the past discipline, to see what the benchmark is, if they've even had files of this nature. And I mean, it would also be the egregiousness of anything. Is it? So I think there's too many, every situation is different, and I would want to look at the totality of the circumstances before commenting on that.
Understood. But as of now, there's no like formal process of what that consequence looks like when officers break these policies from the standard operating procedures at LMPD.
Well, what I would say is I think that it's the totality of the circumstances. And one of the things that we are doing since I got here is developing a discipline matrix. There should be one. There should be one so that you know that if you commit infraction A, this is the range of discipline. That's to provide consistency. That's to provide transparency, and we are researching that now to get that in place. That just has to be in place, and it's not.
Back to the chairperson.
Councilwoman Fowler, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I may have missed this. Was this officer off duty?
Yes. I believe,
okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, Councilman Arthur, I'm not sure how you view it as a political issue when, you know, it may just be a religious issue. So I just wanted to bring that forward. Thank you.
Next in the queue is Councilwoman McCraney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I experienced this same thing. It just seems like in this community, we keep repeating the same problems. When I encountered my situation with the people who are praying, I can tell you that I did not want to be identified. I dressed up in camouflage so that no one would notice me. I just wanted to see when we first dealt with this issue, if what was being said that was being done was actually being done. And I can tell you from my own experience of walking down there and through that crowd that I was totally harassed. They came in my face. They were not praying for me. In fact, they made me feel like I was worthless. When I went into that clinic, changed clothes, came back out, I helped a young woman who was actually there to go get an abortion. She was sobbing her eyes out because she too had been harassed. Now, we can talk about this all we want to, and I can show you videos of my experience. And until we have a heart to change things, we're not going to change things. I'm sick and tired of talking about some of the same stuff over and over and over. I get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from my constituents who say to me, they were just praying. You all need to help this officer get his job back because he was down there praying. What's going to happen next? Are we going to arrest police officers for going to church? You know, you can say what you want to say, but I can tell you from experience, and I have proof positive, that a lot of people down there might be praying, but a whole lot of them are harassing, and they are touching, and they're shoving, and they're making people feel less than a human. And I'm sick and tired of it. If we're not able to put a buffer zone up, then we should somehow or another have police protection down there for these women. Something must be done. We can no longer continue to call ourselves Compassionate City, because we act like in everything we've been talking about tonight, that we have no compassion. And until we stop trying to figure out how we're going to write up policies, we need to look within our souls and figure out how we're going to be a compassionate city. This is ridiculous. It really, truly is ridiculous what we have been talking about all day on this meeting. I mean, this entire meeting is ridiculous. It is simple. It is humanity that we are referring to. And if we don't act like we can solve our human problems with just an act of kindness, then we'll never get anywhere. We're expected to do some things and get things done as council members. And certainly LMPD is expected to do a great job above what we have been experiencing in these streets as of late. And we have to stop pushing blame. We got to stop saying we don't know. We got to stop making excuses. We've got to say enough is enough. Handle the problems, get rid of the problems, let's move forward. And then as council people, we don't want to have to always ask you to come and speak before us to explain why you made an error. We got to get past this. Let's get it together, people. There's a problem down there, and we know it's a problem. We can call it praying if we want to, but let's be real. There's a lot more going on, and I can experience. This is upsetting to me because it seems like we continue with the same conversation. And we act like we are not adults, and we act like we don't know what we need to do. And we do know what we need to do. Let's be the compassionate city that we say we are, and stop all of this that we are claiming to be investigatory or we're looking into it. We know there's a problem. We need to fix it. We need to come together and fix it. And LMPD, I am imploring you, I am begging of you not to be down there in uniform with your car parked in front of there protesting, but why don't you put on uniform while you're on duty and help the people get through this line of harassment and put a buffer zone. If we can't approve a buffer zone, then we need some safety. And that should come from LMPD. I could go on because this is frustrating and it's humiliating for the women who are basically trying to get some health care. Do I want everybody to go get abortions? I would never, ever protest and advocate anyone getting an abortion. But I can tell you what, people deserve dignity in this conversation and in the homeless conversation we just had. Enough is enough. I'm sorry, I yield. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam. Next in the queue is Councilman Fox. Councilman Fox, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I find it a bit ironic. In the first hour, we were debating over the police clearing a sidewalk. And in the second hour, we're debating over the police not clearing a sidewalk. A couple of my colleagues drew some assumptions that we'd all seen the video on social media. I can tell you I've not seen the video on social media. So, Chief Shields, I have a couple of really brief questions that I don't believe will violate 15520. The first one, and you may have already addressed it with Councilwoman Fowler, was the police officer down there on duty? Yes or no?
Sorry, I was muted. I've been advised I simply cannot comment on the merits of this particular case.
All right, I'll rephrase. If the police officer was down there off duty, he controls his employer to prevent it.
You know what, folks? I pretty much have commented to the extent I can on this case. I think we've laid it out. What I would ask, I can't say this enough, that you petition to get 67C lifted so we can have candid conversations.
I think you can answer a simple question, Chief. If a police officer's off duty, what controls do you have over his or hers travels and where they go?
Well, it would depend if they're off duty and they are in uniform, or if you're immediately recognizable by your employer. So you would have to qualify what position, what posture they were presenting themselves in while they were off duty.
Right, I agree. And I have not seen the video, but the policy states about the political activity referenced by one of my colleagues that an officer should not engage in that while on duty or in uniform. Now, I don't know if this officer was in uniform because I haven't seen the video, but I think we're getting in a very gray area here because people don't agree on these things. People don't agree. And it's been almost stated like everybody's in agreement. You have to see it my way. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There are religious beliefs. There's a little thing called a First Amendment right. There's differences of opinion that are to be debated and to be respected. And I think that's been lost in the early innings of this conversation, that people have a right to express their view, even if they're not yours. So, that's part of going through life is finding compromises. And, if this police officer was off duty and it was in civilian dress, then he has a right as anyone else to be involved in a lawful activity. And, again, just because it doesn't agree with your view of things doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean we should write a policy to prohibit it. It's part of living in a free society. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Next in the queue is Council President James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Shields, thank you for being here. I just wanted to ask a couple questions related to the officer and the protest, and a little bit in line with what Councilman Fox just said. And I guess my caution or curiosity is that as people have political views, no matter what they are. Some we agree with as individuals and some we don't. But this summer, the police department encouraged police officers to go out and protest, and some of the protests were taking place. I've seen videos of that taking place. Jesse Holliday, who works for the mayor's office, encouraged them to do so. When we have an officer that's working or not working, but is off duty, decides to protest, and something I may not particularly agree with or support, I guess my question is, where does the department draw that fine line at if we encourage them to actively protest with one group but not with another group?
Thank you, Council President. What I would say to that is I would not, as a chief, actively encourage employees to participate while they're representing LMPD for this various reason. It's only going to create issues such as what we're contending with now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next in the queue is Councilman Arthur.
I want to respond to a few of my colleagues, Councilman Mark Fox, again, and this is for everyone. I've seen the video and I'm happy to share it and forward it with anyone. This officer had on a jacket and a hat, but he did indeed have his squad car. It was parked in front of the clinic, and he had his LMPD firearm on him. Now, if he didn't have his LMPD firearm, and maybe he got a squad car that he just bought his own decals and put them on himself, and it looked like an LMPD squad vehicle, somebody please correct me. But to my knowledge, he had that on site in front of the clinic. And then also to comment on the irony of us talking about clearing the sidewalk earlier and not clearing it now. Earlier, we were talking about people who lived on the sidewalk, and not just any people, my constituents that I'm here to speak on behalf of, because they're not here to let you know directly that the city has forgotten about them. Councilwoman Fowler, excuse me. I know you mentioned like abortion and not being a political issue. It might be a religious issue. Unfortunately, our colleagues have made it a political issue, and politicians across this country have made it a political issue. And we have to acknowledge that the EMW clinic offers so many services besides abortion. It offers a number of services as a health provider. And these people who are protesting have no clue what people are going there for. But my question to Chief Shields, and I'm looking at the bigger picture here, LMPD authorized Public Works to destroy somebody's belongings, multiple people's belongings. They put out a statement that had a number of lies in it. They broke LMPD policy in front of the EMW clinic because I just pointed out that they did in fact have their squad vehicle and their LMPD firearm. They did all of this, and all we get today is I don't know, I can't say anything, and an apology on the Facebook post.
Okay, so as I've stated repeatedly, leverage your position and help me out so state law 67C gets overturned so I can comment. This isn't me not wanting to comment. I comment as much as I could on the prior issue, but I am limited here legally by what I can say. So help me solve this so that we can have a transparent conversation.
I'm happy to do that, but I've mentioned transparency once, and I mentioned a number of other issues that broke policy. And again, after everything that I just listed, including lying about statements that, according to your definition, put out, clearing a camp in downtown Louisville, all of these policies were broken, and all we got was a sorry from LMPD.
Not okay there. Okay. I at no point said the statement that you were referring to was inaccurate. We were talking about two different statements, and shame on us for not talking about the same thing and clarifying that. The statement that was put out by LMPD, I asked you, what's the falsehood? What's the lie? We screwed up. There you go. I don't know what you want me to say. The whole point is we don't have an internal policy that governs these folks. And there was a good faith effort to clean the park. And the two people, the one from LMPD, the one from Public Works, who knew that this area was only to be clean, were both off. And you got two different people that came in and they thought it was supposed to be cleared. That's a human error. It's a mistake. There wasn't ill intent. I don't know what more I can say on that. As far as what's occurred at the clinic, we've opened a file to see if it violated our internal policy, and we'll adjudicate it as quickly as we can. But if you want further comment on it, I need you to stop just yelling from the bleachers and help me get this changed. Help me with state law.
On behalf of the constituents of District 4, we do not accept your apology. Back to the chairperson.
Next in queue is Councilman Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not to be argumentative, but only to further educate my colleague. Once a police officer is sworn, he's required to carry a number of items, required by law, actually, carry a number of items, a badge, a photo identification, and a firearm. And in some cases, there are members of the LMPD still carrying personally owned firearms because the issuance of firearms came in after the merger in 2003 when the police departments merged. I'm assuming when you said, or my colleague said, the man had on a hat and a cap, I believe a cap and a jacket. That was not a police cap and a police jacket. That is not a violation of policy, nor is the police car being parked on the street a violation of the policy unless the chief prohibits it in certain areas. Police officers can use those cars off duty to drive to the grocery store, to drive to ball games, to drive wherever they want. And in summary, like I said, just throw this out there for educational purposes. But in summary, I don't believe it's fair to limit a person's First Amendment right just because of where they're employed. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify with my colleague, Councilman Arthur. Not one time did I say anything about abortion in what I said. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm looking at the queue, folks, and there's no one else in the queue. Chief, Shields, I'd just like to say this. I recognize you're prohibited from commenting at the moment on the investigation. However, my hope is that this investigation won't drag on forever. And I will point to your predecessor. There was an issue involving a young man, Tayon Lee, which was an issue of a young man being pulled out of his car at gunpoint for just being in an area of town with a nice car. And my concern is that investigation, much of it caught on tape, took 2 years to conclude. And I believe the conclusion was ultimately the officer resigned or went elsewhere, and that ended the investigation. In my opinion, 2 years to investigate that and really not come to conclusion, only come to an end only because the officer resigned, is a ridiculous amount of time. My hope is that this investigation will not take an exorbitant amount of time. And my hope is that you will commit to this body that we won't have to ask, has that been concluded yet? When it is concluded, that you will let us know and let us know what the results were at that time when you're at liberty to talk. Is that a commitment we can get from you?
Listen, it's absolutely. I'm not looking for a 2-year file, okay? I walked into this office with 70 files backed up, going about 3 years. This is where I need you to leverage your voice. I realize you're city council, but you're the biggest city in this state. There is state law that holds up files. It does not allow anyone other than myself to appear at any disciplinary hearing. So if an employee is to get disciplined, I alone have to appear before the hearing, a hearing that can take up to a week for trivial matters. This is where the backlog is really coming into play. I need your help getting the process moving along. That being said, there's no reason that this file should take any time at all. I'll give it a couple of months. Now, whether or not I can speak to it when we've completed it, or if the employee has to get disciplined, I don't know. But I'm not gonna. I will be back here telling you that this file is closed out sooner than later.
Thank you. That's the most we can ask of you at the moment under the law, and the fact that you're committing to us that's what you're doing. We appreciate it.
All right.
Is there anything else from the committee? Hearing nothing, we will stand adjourned, and I appreciate the administration and chief and everybody's willingness to come out tonight and talk to us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.